My name is John Liddicoat, and I'm the Vice President and General Manager of our structural heart business. Our structural heart business is part of our cardiovascular portfolio and really includes all of our transcatheter valve products, which we're primarily here to speak to today. The Melody valve is a breakthrough technology which allows physicians, primarily pediatric interventional cardiologists, to replace the pulmonary valve without having to undergo open heart surgery. This is really targeting patients with congenital heart disease who, over the course of their lifetime, oftentimes have to have multiple operations to replace or repair a damaged pulmonary valve. The Melody valve is a non-surgical alternative that actually replaces the functioning of that valve with a conduit that is delivered percutaneously up through a vessel in the leg. Interestingly, the Melody valve is actually the first commercialized transcatheter valve anywhere in the world. It received CE mark in 2006 in Western Europe. And though it's a completely different type of valve compared to our CoreValve or Ventor products, there are great learnings that we have from that commercial experience. We've really worked with physicians to develop a robust, collaborative, integrated education program so that we can actually bring these technologies forward in a very safe and efficacious way. Both Ventor and CoreValve are breakthrough technologies in transcatheter valves. They are alternatives to open heart surgery for the replacement of aortic valve, primarily for the treatment of aortic stenosis. Both valves or both companies target the treatment of patients with aortic stenosis, but they treat very different subsets of patients. They do this because they have very different routes of administration. CoreValve is actually delivered up through a blood vessel in the leg and then passed along the aorta up to the location of the native aortic valve and replaces the functioning of the valve in that way. Ventor takes a very different approach. Ventor is actually passed up through the ventricle of the heart itself through a small incision in the chest. And so even though both technologies treat patients with aortic stenosis, they treat distinctly different subsets of patients. Yeah, it's a great question, and just in the nature of your question of it being interventional cardiologists versus cardiac surgeons, I think highlights a legacy that we're no longer seeing in clinical practice. In fact, we're seeing tremendous collaboration between cardiac surgeons and interventional cardiologists as they bring these new technologies forward. In fact, it's fundamentally changing the way that they practice medicine in terms of the way that they treat patients with heart valve disease. Historically, these patients have been brought into their clinics and they may or may not be referred for surgery, and then the surgeon would ultimately decide whether or not that patient would undergo heart surgery. It's a very different day now. Patients who present themselves to a clinic with transcatheter valves actually get evaluated by a multidisciplinary team which includes cardiac surgeons, interventional cardiologists, anesthesiologists, echocardiographers, and then together in a very programmatic way they actually then determine what therapy is best for that patient, whether it's ongoing medical therapy, a percutaneous valve, or in fact a surgical valve procedure. CoreValve is the market-leading transfemoral technology at this time. In fact, we enjoy about 75% of the transfemoral market share at this point in time. If you look at our technology, it really is comprised of three different components. It has a self-expanding nitinol frame, it has a porcine pericardial tissue valve, and then it has a delivery system. That tissue valve is actually sewn into the self-expanding nitinol frame, and then together they're compressed and then placed into the delivery system. That self-expanding nitinol frame actually enables the device to be passed up through the groin and then easily navigated up into the position of the diseased aortic valve. The delivery system is then carefully backed up, and then the self-expanding nitinol begins to expand actually over the course of several seconds. The self-expanding nitinol, a great feature of it is in fact that it can be deployed very safely, heartbeat to heartbeat. The interventional cardiologist or the cardiac surgeon can actually watch the deployment happen real time. And this is a terrific advantage because if they don't like the position that the valve is being deployed in, they can actually reposition it and make it very, very accurate. So as the frame starts to deploy, again, slowly over time, it can actually conform to the shape of the native annulus, which really allows it to, in many ways, conform to the heavily calcified, diseased valve. So that implantability is very comforting to the interventional cardiologist. There is no aha moment, there is no leap of faith, and it really decreases the risk of an inaccurate placement or even a valve migration. If you look at the design of the valve itself, it's also distinctly different from the balloon expandable technologies. The length of CoreValve is very long, and in fact what this allows then is that you can have the commissures or the stent or the height of the tissue be very high. And this allows then the stress to be dissipated over a much larger surface. So the durability of the valve will certainly be enhanced. And then finally, because it is a valve which is mounted into self-expanding nitinol, it doesn't have to be balloon expanded so that there won't be that compressive force of this high-pressure balloon compressing the tissue against this very rigid frame. So we feel that that is going to provide a real durability advantage as well. Porcine pericardium offers really great advantages. In fact, if you look at porcine pericardium, it has very similar tensile strength to other pericardial valves and valve tissue rather. But if you look at it, it's actually much thinner than other pericardial tissues. So it allows you to compress the valve into a much smaller delivery system, which then allows you to treat more and more patients. Because one of the limiting things for some of the valves is the fact that their delivery systems are very large, and it makes it very difficult then to access the patient's native aortic valve because it's just very difficult to pass that large payload up through the groin into the aorta. Heart block is a possible consequence of really any procedure that's done on the aortic valve, particularly for aortic stenosis and particularly in the elderly patient populations for whom most of these percutaneous devices are being developed. So it is certainly something that we see in clinical practice. When you are diagnosed with heart block, some of those patients go on to actually require a pacemaker, depending on whether or not they have a permanent or a temporary requirement for pacing. The reporting of heart block is extremely variable. It's highly variable in surgical procedures, and it's highly variable certainly in the percutaneous valve procedures as well. Since we've acquired CoreValve, we've actually been looking into the pacemaker requirement because we've had a broad range of pacer implantation rather that has been reported. And as we've started to look into this, we understand now that there's a variety of factors that are impacting that, and we are addressing each of those sequentially. We're very excited about the conversations that we've had with the FDA. As you know, we just assumed these conversations with the FDA from CoreValve just over the last few months. To date, we've really been focusing on the requirements that the FDA has on the preclinical testing of the device, and we are starting to initiate our conversations around the clinical protocol design as well. So we expect over the next couple of months that these conversations that we've started and we've been going back and forth with the FDA are going to really start taking form. So we're very, very excited about that. We anticipate that we'll actually start the U.S. clinical trial in this upcoming summer, so the summer of calendar year 10. And that would put us on schedule to launch in the U.S. in calendar year 14. Right now, the indication for these procedures is really targeting those patients that are at prohibitive risk or at a very high risk for a surgical valve replacement. Over time, we will continue to see those indications expand, and that ultimately we anticipate that this market, the market specifically for transcatheter aortic valves, will be in the range of somewhere around $2.5 to $3.5 billion a year. our surgical valve portfolio continues to be a major focus for us. We certainly have best-in-class technologies with our stentless valve Freestyle, our Mosaic valve, and our Hancock II. I mean, our Hancock II valve continues to do particularly well in our international markets and continues to take share there for us. We'll continue to make incremental investments in all three of those platforms. In addition, we're very excited in the next really 6 months or so to add a brand new platform to our surgical valve portfolio, and for the first time we're going to be bringing forward a third generation surgical pericardial valve as well. So that is going to round out our full surgical valve portfolio.